Have you ever gone to make a recipe like chocolate chip cookies and you find that you don't have enough of one ingredient, such as chocolate chips? Maybe your little brother ate half of the bag of the chocolate chips, so you don't have enough for all of your cookies. If you've ever been in that situation, that ingredient, the one that you don't have enough of, in chemistry, we would call that the limiting reagent. Okay? It's an ingredient that we don't have enough of in order to make the amount of product that the recipe or that the chemical reaction is calling for. Okay, we have an insufficient quantity of that reactant. How can we find what the limiting reagent is? How can we determine what the limiting reagent is? If we're given certain amounts of reactants, if we have the chemical reaction, the balanced equation, we can determine which reactant is the limiting reagent, which guy is the one that we don't have enough of. So in our first example, we're going to start out with having solid copper, and it reacts with solid sulfur. Okay, guys, go away. Go away. There we go. And that will make copper 2 sulfide. Okay. So our question is, what is the limiting reagent if we have 80 grams of copper and it reacts with 25, on my decimal there, 25.0 grams of sulfur? So what do? We want to list our known quantities. Our known quantities are 80 grams of copper and 25 grams of sulfur. Our unknown is the limiting reagent. We need to be able to figure out what that is. The first thing that we want to do is we want to take what we have in grams here and we want to convert to moles. So we want to convert grams of copper to moles. So we have 1 mole of copper and its molar mass is 63.5 grams, and this would equal 1.26 moles of copper. And for sulfur, slide this down here a little bit, 1 mole of sulfur has a molar mass of 32.1 grams. So we have 25 grams divided by 32.1 grams. We end up with 0.779 moles of sulfur. Okay, so this is our given quantity. Let me use a different color here. Okay, so we'll label this given. Okay, I've just converted those to moles. All right. However, in a chemical reaction, these reactants need to occur together in ratios, in certain ratios. And what we want to find out is if 80 grams and 25 grams, or 80 grams of copper and 25 grams of sulfur are in the correct ratio. And if they're not, which one don't we have enough of? Which one is our limiting reagent? So what I'm going to do is use a mole ratio to figure that out. And I can start out with any one of these guys. I could either start out with copper or sulfur, it doesn't matter. So I'll start out with copper. I have 1.26 moles of copper. That's my given quantity. How much sulfur, what would be the correct ratio of sulfur do I need to react exactly with that given amount of copper? In order to figure that out, I would use a mole ratio here. So this is going to be a mole ratio. My mole ratio would be moles of sulfur to moles of copper. I want to figure out how many moles of sulfur do I need exactly to react with this many moles of copper. So I go back to my balanced equation. I have 1 mole of sulfur for every 2 moles of copper. And when I do the math, I have 1.26 divided by 2, and this is 0.630 moles of sulfur. This is my needed quantity. This is what I need in the proper ratio to react with this much copper, with my given amount of copper. Okay, so when I make my comparison, I need this much sulfur, but I have 0.779 moles of sulfur. I have more sulfur than I need. What does that tell me? Okay, I have more sulfur than needed. So that means sulfur is in excess. If sulfur is in excess, it's what we call the excess reagent. It's the one that we have too much of. Okay? So if sulfur is the one that we have too much of, by default, copper is the one that we don't have enough of. So therefore, and this is the symbol for therefore, the logic symbol for therefore, copper is the limiting reagent. Okay, I could prove that. I could do the same thing I did up here, but instead of starting with moles of copper, I could start with moles of sulfur and figure out how much copper I need to react. So if I have 0.779 moles of sulfur, how much copper, how many moles of copper do I need to react with it? So I have moles of copper here. This is going to be my mole ratio. Moles of sulfur here. I have 2 moles of copper for every 1 mole of sulfur. So this ends up being 1.56 moles of copper. Okay, so that's my needed quantity of copper, and this is my given quantity of sulfur. So what I'm going to do is compare it to this information that was up here. Okay, I need this much copper, 1.56 moles. How much was I given? I was only given 1.26 moles. So here now you directly can see that I don't have enough copper. I have 1.26 moles, I need 1.56 moles. Therefore, this reiterates that copper is my limiting reagent. So when you're doing a limiting reagent problem, take both of your reactants, convert them to moles if they're not already in moles. Okay? Those will be your given quantities. Then what you need to do is compare it to your needed quantity. How do you find the needed quantity? You take one of these guys and you're given, multiply it by the mole ratio that I've done here. Okay, the mole ratio tells me the exact ratio of reactants that I need, and then I can make that comparison. So again, mole ratios are extremely important in determining limiting reagents.